Welcome back to another Magicka Mayhem tutorial video. This is Ken Erickson, and we're going to go over just some basic helpful information. We tried to cover as much as we could in the tutorial videos and in the rules, but sometimes there's just a couple of nuances that it's hard to find where they end up in the rule book or where they end up in a video. So we just kind of put them at the end as like a little reference for some things that you might have missed, or maybe just kind of flying through the instruction book to get that first game started. But they're good things to keep in mind so that the game plays out just nicely, or just some funny questions you'll have that you don't want to stop in the middle of a game and then have to look it up and then deal with it later. So it's nice to kind of deal with that stuff right off the bat. Anyway, I'll mostly just kind of read it off of here, but I might throw in a little extra. So anyway, when a card deck, element, spell, or mayhem card deck, there's 3 different card decks. When they run out of cards, you just simply reshuffle the discarded cards and continue. Nobody wins by running out of cards and that's it. You want to keep going until all the wizards are destroyed except for one. So make sure you reshuffle those cards and reuse them. All card exchanges, I think hopefully I made this point pretty strong when we talked about the card exchange video, but I want to make it again really clear because this is how Ethan used to like to cheat with me a bunch of times until we made this rule. I guess it wasn't cheating because it wasn't a rule at that time, but it became a rule after he destroyed me a number of times with his little cheating, what I think was cheating kind of card exchanges. But what you do is when you trade in your cards, you must trade in all the cards that you want to trade in for that turn at the very beginning. Before you draw any replacement cards, and you just do it one time. So say, oh, I'm gonna exchange this spell card with these and these 2 element cards, and I want to get some other cards back, whatever order you want. You put those down, and then you draw the new cards, and that's it. You don't get to put one down, draw, then look at your cards, put another one down, draw, look at your cards. Don't do that. No piecemeal exchanging. Spell card spells must be cast during the casting wizard's turn. So that's the entire heart of the game. You know, when it's your turn, you can look at your spell cards, you can combine them with the elements, you can cast your spell cards. However, snap spells can be cast whenever. You can cast them on your turn, you can be cast during another wizard's turn, you can be cast whenever you want. But when it's your turn, you can cast the snap spells at another wizard. But if it's not your turn, you can only cast your snap spells at another wizard's spell. So if the spell's coming right at you, you can use that. When it's not your turn, obviously, because the other wizard is casting a spell at you. You can then do your snap spell to counter that. So keep that in mind. The snap spells can only be cast at a wizard on your turn, but you can cast the snap spells any other time you like, as long as it's aimed at another spell. And summoning spells cannot be Mayhem-ified. So we tried doing this with the rules, but it became a little too complicated to figure out how the effects would take place. So we recommend you don't Mayhem-ify any of your summoning spells. So if you want to summon a creature, it will be summoned no matter what. It will not be interrupted with. It will not be Mayhem-ified. It will not be snap spelled. It just will happen. So that's a fairly straightforward one. Element cards cannot be split between 2 spells. I think we've talked about this a couple different times. If you have a Raging Fire card that actually is worth 2 fires, you cannot take one of the fires and put it in one spell, and take one of the other fires and put it in a different spell. You could put both fires in the same spell. You could put one fire into a spell and lose the second one, but you cannot split them between two spells. Elements left over from the casting of a spell are consumed by the spell, and they disappear. Also, a wet target remains wet until it is dried, frozen, or zapped. I think we covered that pretty well in the video too, but it's a good one because some people say, oh, well, how long are you wet? Is it just for one turn? It's like, nope, you are wet until you're not wet anymore. And that means somebody has to dry you, somebody has to freeze you, or somebody has to zap you. And then otherwise you're wet until the very end of the game. And also we have in Spellmageddon, snap spells cannot be cast at a wizard's spell. So that's how we made Spellmageddon so much more simple. You can use a snap spell to cast at another wizard and say, I'm gonna hit you with the cold cube, and I'm gonna freeze you. But if you're, I'll tell you what, probably not a good example. I'm gonna hit you with a flickering flame, and I'm gonna hit you for one damage. So then you can do that one, no problem. But if you have a spell coming in, there is no spell versus spell in Spellmageddon, so don't do that one. That is only possible when playing spell versus spell. Mayhem cards have no impact on snap spells. So a Mayhem muster test only occurs after a spell card spell has been cast. So if you have a snap spell is going up to your direction, there's no Mayhem muster for that one. And summoned creatures cannot attack on the same turn at which they are summoned. unless the summoning card says otherwise. There's a card in there, I think there's a card in one of the add-on packs where it can actually attack on the same turn that it is summoned, but that's a rarity. So you can't do it unless it says it on the card. And while a wizard may have more than 10 cards in their hand during their turn, they must discard excess cards at the end of the turn. So you might do some exchange stuff, and maybe you end up getting 12 cards in your hand. No problem. You can use those cards during that turn, but as soon as your turn is over, if you haven't used those cards to cast a spell or something along those lines, you must discard cards to get to that point. It doesn't matter what mix between spell and element, it's just a matter of 10 cards total. And beam spells, this is one that confused some of our people, some of our playtesters, so it's good that we're kind of clarifying this one too. Beam spells take effect over multiple turns, beginning with the turn in which it is cast. Most of your beams end up being over 3 turns. So when you cast that spell, let's say it's 2 damage over 3 rounds. I'm sorry, 2 damage over 3 turns. The very first turn, it's 2 damage. The second turn, it's 2 damage. The third turn, it's 2 damage. The first turn happens right when it's cast. It's immediate. And then if a beam spell is disrupted, which stops future damage, it's disrupted by a shield barrier. So if you cast the spell and it's going, and then on turn number 2, the target puts up a shield barrier, it actually stops it. They still keep the old damage. The damage from turn 1 still happens, the 2 damage, but damage 2 in round 2, I'm sorry, I keep saying round, but I mean damage the 2 in turn 2 and damage 2 in turn 3, they don't happen. The shield stops it altogether because it was a beam, and once it's disrupted, it can't continue. However, the barrier would be destroyed in the process, but it does disrupt the spell. And even though beam spells occur over multiple turns, they are only subject to one Mayhem muster test that affects the spell for all turns. So if you cast a beam, then and there's a Mayhem muster roll, and then a Mayhem card comes up, and let's say it says that the spell does double damage. Well, guess what? It does double damage the first turn, does double damage the second turn, it does double damage the third turn. If it's disrupted, let's say if the spell fails, it fails, and once it fails on that first turn, there is no second turn and there is no third turn. So it has to kind of continue all the way through. That's the nature of a beam. And I think that should kind of make sense. And I think that kind of covers all the helpful information. We have a couple definitions here we can kind of go over as well. Element, we consider those the ingredients needed to cast spells. A spell card spell is any spell spell that is cast using a spell card, as opposed to a snap spell that can be cast without a spell card. It can just be a couple elements combined together. It's a memorized spell, and it's flung out right away. Mayhem is fun silliness that may or may not happen after each spell card spell, and it has to pass a Mayhem muster. Wet is when a 2-water snap spell, called a Wet Willy, makes a target susceptible to freezing and or zapping. And then Mayhem muster is the test that a spell card spell must pass before affecting its target. Dry is when a wet target is dried using a 2-fire snap spell. Drying does not cause any damage. You can use that same 2-fire snap spell to cause damage to a dry wizard, but if you cast it to a wet wizard like yourself, it would not cause damage. It would just dry you. Frozen or freeze is a wizard that is frozen skips a turn, and they will skip. So basically, they skip the next turn. Obviously, if they're frozen and it's not their turn, when their turn comes up, they just skip that one turn. And if you're frozen during the turn of play, you would actually stop that turn and you miss the whole next turn as well. A wet target can be frozen with a 2-cold snap spell. And there's also some spell card spells that also create freezing as well. A zap or zapped is when a wet target is hit with a 2-lightning snap spell. So it could be that it'll zap you, and it oftentimes causes more damage than just the other. There's also spell card spells that will create a zapping effect as well if the wizard is wet. Weak means that when a target is weak, this is oftentimes when you'll see summoned elementals. Targets weak to spells with specific elements suffer twice the usual damage. And then immune means targets that are immune to spells with specific elements cannot be injured by such a spell. So that's a pretty powerful effect. And that generally happens in your summoned elementals, but you do see it in some of the wearable add-ons as well, the wizard wearables add-on packs. And opposing elements often have disastrous effects when mixed. So when that's critical for understanding how counter spells work, and also for summoning as well. because a lot of times your summoned elementals will be of a certain type of element, and they'll be weak to the opposing element, and they'll be immune to the same element that was used in their casting initially. So I hope that kind of gives a little explanation too on some of the definitions as well. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope this helps you really enjoy the game.